Good evening and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool. Tonight we're going to be speaking about marriages and more specifically the non-recognition of Muslim marriages in South Africa throughout our 27 years of democracy. Now, legal recognition of marriages is important in order for women to assert their rights. We've seen in court cases over the years, especially in the case of divorce or the death of a spouse. In cases where the marriage is not recognized, women are often left out in the cold with little recourse to claim land, maintenance, child maintenance, or other things which are due to them. For our discussion this evening, we'll be joined by Seehaam Semaai, who is the director of the Women's Legal Center, who's going to explain the context around this issue and also why it's been taking 20 years for us to get somewhere. But before that, because the issue has been taking so long, we're going to look at a short video that outlines what the battle has been about. Let's take a look.
I'm Seehaam Semaai and I'm the director of the Women's Legal Center, which advances the rights of women through strategic litigation and advocacy. The Women's Legal Center prides itself as an African feminist legal center, and we litigate in a range of matters, which includes equality in relationships. In this matter, for the past 25 years, the Women's Legal Center have been litigating in relation to the recognition of Muslim marriages and to be able to ensure that there's broader recognition as well as regulation for Muslim women in Muslim marriages after the divorce or dissolution of their marriage. It has been a very long road for the Women's Legal Center and the women who have sought recognition of their marriages over the past 20 years. The Constitutional Court, as the highest court in the country, will now decide the issue of recognition and provide legal certainty on the Women's Legal Center submissions that the state has a constitutional and positive obligation to enact legislation. The Commission of Gender Equality as well as the Human Rights Commission are both supporting us in respect of the constitutional obligation question, and they have been admitted as amici in our constitutional matter. The issue of recognition is critically important because there will be legal certainty in relation to the obligations in relation to marriage, and also broadly it will provide recourse in relation to rights, in relation to housing and land and property when the marriage ends in death or even upon divorce. We know that there is law reform in progress. We know that the Department of Home Affairs have now issued their green paper in relation to broader recognition of marriage. And also we know that the South African Law Reform Commission has also submitted a paper in relation to the single marriages discussion paper. But we also know that in all likelihood, we will only see this in 2024 based on the different legal and law reform processes before a bill is enacted. In the interim period, there needs to be remedies for Muslim women who have their marriages end in death or divorce. Today, we wanted to make sure that the Constitutional Court understands the importance of interim relief pending the legislation being enacted, and that the court understands that it must include as many women as possible because we should not leave women behind where they have suffered the injustices of not having their marriages recognized. South Africa is made up of diverse families, and the state has an obligation to ensure that it recognizes their diversity and respects and promotes the rights of the most vulnerable. We hope that the Constitutional Court today will listen to the submissions that have been made by both the state and the Women's Legal Center as well as the various amici, and that we positively await a judgment where we hope that the Constitutional Court will uphold the international regional obligations as well as constitutional obligations to ensure that we recognize Muslim marriages as well as ensure broader to ensure that there is broader regulation of the marriages.
That was a short video outlining the battle that's been going on for the recognition of Muslim marriages over the past 20 years. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and tonight we are speaking about marriages and specifically the non-recognition of Muslim and Islamic marriages in South Africa. Joining us now is Seehaam Semaai, who is the director of the Women's Legal Center, an organization that has been championing this issue for around 20 years now. Welcome, Seehaam. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And also thank you for inviting the Women's Legal Center.
Yes, so before we get into this conversation, we wanted to illustrate what this issue looks like on the ground for women who are dealing with the issue of not having their marriages recognized. And so we spoke to some stakeholders, some community activists, and we're just going to have a quick look and listen at what they had to say.
My name is Ludovika Gordon. I'm one of the community activists in Bonteheuwel. And thank you for having me as part of your show pertaining to the Muslim marriages and the rights of women that are infringed when they do get divorced from their husbands or when a talaq is being granted to them. Part of what I do is work with women who are struggling to access the maintenance courts, or who do not know how to go about, applying for maintenance, and who are fearing intimidation from their partners and sometimes the partner's new spouse and even the extended family members, And what is sad to note is that all the women basically have got the same story, in that when they have been granted the divorce or talaq in Islam, then the wife is basically left destitute. She's left with nothing, I just briefly spoke with 3 ladies that have gone through the process, and that I am currently assisting, by accessing the courts and doing the court buddy system with them, by trying to get them to get something at least for the children. And the trend is the same with all of them, that the one woman said to me that after being married for 14 years, her husband just gave her 1 talaq, and she was told via text message, you do not come back home. You are no longer welcome here. And everything that she has worked with him for had to stay behind. She cannot get access to her furniture. She can't get access to anything that is legally hers. So, the trousseau that she took with her, even the crockery, he doesn't want to give it to her. And she worked with him in the business, built it up. They started it together. She worked as a receptionist in his business, never got a cent paid for that because, she was his wife. And he just wouldn't give her anything. She said when she asked at the beginning, before they got married in 2003, when she mentioned to him, can we also have a civil union? He said no. He refused to do that because, quote unquote, why must he flow and follow what the other people are doing? He's a Muslim man, and they will get married only according to the Muslim law. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. What is an injustice, however, is that after a talaq is granted, the woman is left with nothing. And often, more often than not, you'll find that there are children involved, and that means that the woman also don't have anything for the children, because she's now currently 4 years in the maintenance system, and I can tell you that we are yet even to have a court appearance with him. He doesn't pitch for court. He doesn't give her 10 rand towards a loaf of bread, and this lady is struggling on her own. The same with one of the other ladies. whose husband decided, when she discovered that she was pregnant now again, that he's not the father of that child. And she was also summarily dismissed from the marriage, and he gave her a talak. He got remarried within a week after. And she is also struggling, living now with family members in a room with 4 kids, because they've got nowhere else to go. And she's not working, being pregnant. She also couldn't just step out there into the workplace because now we're also faced with COVID, which makes it even more difficult. And now she's sitting with a newborn baby and no recourse. And what is sad is to find that the courts are not very helpful with these women. With my first lady, she was told that go back to the MJC because they married you, so they must be able to help you because we don't have your marriage on record. If you can't produce a marriage certificate according to the country's laws, then the court is not going to be able to help you. So we have got women that are struggling, and I mean really, really struggling, that are left without not just the earthly possessions, but also, assistance for the children that they had with their partners. And it is very sad to see that they are struggling. They are struggling to get help. Our legal system doesn't allow for that. So where else can they go? What else can they do? And I think it's very important that we address this matter, because we need to find some sort of recourse for women who are in this situation. And this is just 2 and 3 of the stories that I have, but there are countless many others. And like I said in the beginning of this, that you will find the trend is the same. The wife is being told, don't come back home, and she's left with nothing. Even if when there's children involved, the man, the husband, or the ex-husband now, he feels that he has got no obligation towards his children, because why must he give her a cent? When she turns to the courts, there is no recourse, there's no help, there's no assistance. And also, in the one instance where the lady has got a protection order, she was told at the police station, when she actually asked him to come and give assistance because he's violating the protection order, she was told by a police officer, but your protection order is not actually valid because you were not really married to him. When she said, but he's my ex-husband, when they heard she was married as in the Muslim way, she was told, but that's not a valid marriage. That is very demoralizing, it's very demeaning, and it is also extremely insulting to a woman that was married according to her religion. And we as a country do not recognize it. So this is something that is needed. We need the legislation, we need the guidelines, because we need to find a way best to assist those who are in need, and are literally left destitute and on the street. Thank you so much. I hope this helps you.
So that was some testimony from community activists who are assisting women who are dealing with issues as a result of not having their marriages legally recognized. And now, Seehaam, we're going to go into conversation. And I wanted to start with sort of some context around why, how not having legal recognition affects everyone. But I also wanted to just start with, a common misconception, if I might call it that. So I grew up hearing that there is something such as a common law marriage. And that means that people who live together for a certain amount of time automatically are viewed as husband and wife. And I still hear it all the time. So I think we should start with looking at, is there such a thing as common law marriage? And if not, what is the issue around Muslim marriages not being recognized?
Firstly, Lenina, the Muslim marriages, Jewish marriages, Rastafari marriages, all religious marriages are not recognized in South Africa. And then, in addition to that, when you talk about the common law marriage, domestic partnerships,
is also not recognized in South Africa. So when people speak about a common law marriage, or what they mean is that what you can claim is in terms of maybe some form of maintenance, but the courts have only developed it to a certain extent. But domestic partnerships, common law marriages in itself, does not exist. And it's quite sad because we have seen many women who have lived with somebody for more than 25 years, 30 years, even 40 years. And upon the dissolution of that marriage through death, in particularly, they see that they don't qualify in terms of maybe the Intestate Succession Act if the person died without a will. And it's quite challenging because at the end of the day, you have contributed so much to this relationship and it's not recognized, and the reciprocal duties and obligations doesn't flow from that what they call domestic partnership or so-called common law marriage. And so similarly, it has been a very long journey for the Women's Legal Center as well as the women who have been fighting or have been trying to get Muslim marriages in particularly recognized and regulated in our law. And we have seen last week the matter was taken to the Constitutional Court for confirmation of the Supreme Court of Appeals order or decision judgment. And we are now awaiting the judgment have been reserved, and we are now awaiting the judgment from the Constitutional Court. But the issue of recognition and regulation is critically important because there will be legal certainty at the end of the day. And with that legal certainty comes obligations, whether or not it's maintenance. For example, in Muslim marriages, which we call nafaka, you have to nafaka the wife. In addition to that, women will be able to have recourse to their rights in housing, their rights in the property when the marriage ends in death or in divorce. So just coming back, the only marriages that are recognized is marriages in terms of the Marriages Act, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, and the civil unions. All other relationships, marriages is not recognized.
Thank you, Seehaam. I mean, that explains it very well. And you've raised a few interesting points here. So one is that we know, you've said customary marriages are recognized. There's also civil unions, which I think is where same-sex marriages are legalized. And so what I'm thinking that, this has taken so long. There is regulation and legislation around these other forms of marriages. So it's not really that the government has been non-responsive to marriage issues. Why has this taken so long?
Well, I mean, firstly, I don't think that there is, or we don't think that there's political will on the part of the state. We do understand that there are many challenges and that the Muslim community is not a homogenous group. They might attempt to work uniformly, but they're not an homogenous group, which technically means there's a lot of diverse ideas, there's a lot of opposition, and there are extreme opposition in relation to the regulation and the recognition of Muslim personal law in our South African law. And there are people that are fundamentally saying that the Constitution, Sharia law is incompatible with the Constitution. But I have to admit that this is a red herring, because this case is not about Sharia law. We are not doing any form of interpretation of the Sharia. In addition to that, we are also, there is no what they call doctrinal entanglement. This particular issue is about rights realization of Muslim women that are not being realized just because of their, firstly, their marital status. And that is a form of discrimination. And the Western Cape High Court, as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal, have all confirmed this discrimination and also the broader obligation on the state to enact legislation. Now, we know that the state in itself is also saying that they've admitted in the Supreme Court of Appeal that there is discrimination. They acknowledge it. However, they don't believe that there's a positive obligation on them to enact the legislation. And therein lies the mischief. Therein lies the challenge. How do we deal with that? And we are saying that we are not advising the court to come up with the content, whether or not it's the old, I would say old, because many people who believe common law marriages exist also still believe that the Muslim Marriages Bill still exists. It does not, and it does not exist in the form of it is not before a cabinet. It is not before Parliament, and people need to be able to realize that there has been a lot of work that has been done in terms of the Muslim Marriages Bill, and we acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, the MMB has been shelved, and we are not advocating for the MMB within our case, which was before the Constitutional Court. We advocated for the legislative reform broadly, whether or not the state wants to amend the common law or develop the common law, whether or not the state want to amend the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, or even the civil unions. At the end of the day, we are not directive in relation to the content. And I think that is very important because there's a lot of mischief. And I think that mischief seeps through in terms of government. And I think that government just needs to make a decision. They must grow a backbone and make a decision in relation to women, because they know Muslim women are not, they are being discriminated against, and that there is a huge amount of abuse that comes because of this non-recognition.
Thank you, Seehaam. And it's interesting because when I was doing the research and I looked up, the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment, I saw that the President's Council admitted that this long delay actually amounts to prejudice against Muslim women. So that is very interesting. And then, and yet, it still has not been resolved. They still haven't sort of made that decision. I just wanted to come back to when you were speaking about sort of the effects on women, this prejudice, and I wanted to ask how, at the Women's Legal Center, how have you seen this affect women and particularly children? Because we know, I'm a divorcee, so I know, for instance, when I got divorced, what made it simpler also was that, our child maintenance and visitation and all of that stuff, we could do it all in one, simple process. How does it affect women whose marriages are not legally recognized?
Exactly what you just explained. I mean, in terms of the Marriages Act, and when you do, in terms of the Divorces Act, when you do a divorce, there's a lot of annexures that is attached to the summons, which means that you need to have, for example, Annexure A that deals with the children. There's Annexure B. There's a lot of that speaks to the custody, the contact, the maintenance, where's the children going to stay and live, etc. That is all done, and that document goes to the family advocate. In relation to talaq and fasak, what happens is that type of investigation doesn't happen because there is no registration, there's no recognition, and everything is just happening in an informal manner, and nobody actually sees where the children goes. Nobody checks where's the primary residence of the children, whether or not there's been no abuse, and that's the type of investigation that the family advocate does. So that is where the prejudice comes in relation to children. When it comes to maintenance, for example, in terms of the Divorce Act, you can, for example, apply for spousal maintenance, maintenance for children as well as spousal maintenance. Now in Islam we know that it's practice that you 3 months of that the woman must be nafaqat or given maintenance for at least 3 months. That's practice at this point in time. And although I don't want to go into the doctrinal issues, at the end of the day, when that imam in that informal institution that gives a divorce, they cannot enforce the maintenance order if the husband doesn't pay. And then what happens with that piece of paper? The paper is worthless because it doesn't do anything towards the dissolution of that marriage or in terms of what happens with the estate. And within that, that is where women are left outside in the cold. They are left without any property. They are left without any form of maintenance. And the joint estate, in more times than not, is shifted to the benefit of the husband. And the women are sitting with the children. They are sitting with no maintenance, no home, and outside on the street. And the only recourse over the past 27 years has been the courts. But we also know that the court processes are very, very expensive. And we cannot afford for each and every woman. I mean, we have had so many cases. We are only 7 lawyers. There are only so much cases that you can do to be able to assist women. So it makes it very difficult because you can't hear these matters in the lower courts because the lower courts don't have jurisdiction, which means that you need to go to the higher court. So you either have to have an exceptionally senior attorney that's got right of appearance in the high court, or secondly, you need to have an attorney and brief an advocate to be able to do your particular matter. And that makes it very difficult.
I'm sorry to break you, Seehaam, but we have to go to a break. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and tonight we are speaking about the non-recognition of religious marriages and in South Africa. And with us is Seehaam Semaai, who is the director of the Women's Legal Center and who has been championing this issue for 20 years. Seehaam, thank you for being with us. And you know, before the break, you were speaking about sort of the effect of not having legal recognition on the marriages for women, especially during divorce. And you also mentioned at the death of a spouse. So I just want to move forward and ask, you know, the long-standing nature of this case is interesting sort of also from a democratic view. It's also, you know, a civic engagement issue. And as you've said, in the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal, they have confirmed that basically, you know, what's happening is wrong and that government needs to take action to develop this legislation, and yet it has not been done. Or has not at least been concluded. What does this say about the democratic process? You know, why should everyone be interested in this case?
Nina, one of the issues is that at the end of the day, this is not just a Muslim women's issue. This impacts on all of us. We know that Muslim auntie that lives down the road, she's just going through a divorce. We all live in a society that is diverse, but we are all connected. And that is what South Africa is all about. We live in our communities through Ubuntu, through togetherness. And what we can see is that it impacts because the cost, I believe that the cost of that divorce or that dissolution gets shifted to the community, to the family, to be able to support this woman. So where does a woman go that doesn't have a house at the end of the day because she's fighting her husband for half of the estate and he has just decided for either sell the house or he brings in a second wife? She has absolutely no a recourse. And the only way is to be able to go to court. That shifts. Where does she go to? She goes back to her family. Sometimes if they don't have family, they go back to friends. And I think all of us together need to be able to understand it's a collective struggle. It's a struggle for women's rights. It's a struggle for even rights emancipation for Muslim women. And collectively, we all need to be able to move forward to be able to ensure that happens so that we can empower and build our community. And I always say that empowered women empower. And so how do we start supporting that auntie or that cousin that is living down the road, and to be able to say, this is the recourse that you do have, and this is how we are going to assist you.
And also, there's a cost to the state as well. If we look at these women who now have to apply for social grants, who you possibly have to have subsidized education for the children, and access to a whole range of other services. I mean, which is a separate show. We're just looking at sort of the financial implications and economic empowerment. But now, Seehaam, there's an interesting development in that legislation around marriages is being developed that does, and I'm not sure how much, but does deal or does mention or include also the issue of religious marriages. But what's interesting is that there are two pieces of legislation, one by the Department of Home Affairs and one by the South African Law Reform Commission, and they were both sort of released roughly at the same time. That, for me, I'm just going to say, sounds so confusing and weird, actually. So maybe you could give us a little bit more context for that.
Yes, it's very confusing. It's exceptionally confusing. I have to admit, I don't know what the state is busy with in relation to doing something like this. Because if it's confusing for lawyers and for journalists like yourself, I mean, how confusing is it for the layperson on the ground? So the South African Law Reform Commission issue paper on single marriages or a single marriages statute was released for public comment. And so the issue paper seeks to comment on the inclusion of Muslim marriages into a single statute, or what they call an omnibus abroad statute that will recognize and regulate all marriages. So this omnibus legislation, that the single marriages issue paper, that was actually commissioned by the Department of Justice and the Department of Home Affairs. The Department of Home Affairs have now decided to issue a green paper, and we know from a green paper it goes to a white paper, then it goes to a bill, and then only it goes to an act. I'll speak about that process again. But they issued a green paper on the recognition, but broadly around marriages. Now, let me just explain to you the two. In terms of the single marriages, yes, there's a inclusion of Muslim marriages, but and there's also an inclusion of what they call, for example, domestic partnerships, which is living partnerships. Your so-called common law marriages is also included within this South African Law Reform Commission issue paper, and how to broadly regulate that. With regard to the green paper, now the green paper starts out and it indicates also, I mean, there's a plethora of legislation dealing with marriage. We've got the Marriages Act, Divorce Act, we've got the recognition of customary marriages, we've got the civil unions. And so what this act is trying to do is to be able to start regulating all of this and to be able to bring it into one single statute, which will then include the Muslim marriages. What the content of this? Now, this isn't the MMB. This is not the Muslim marriages bill. This is a completely different piece of a different bill. And it's a green paper, which means that it speaks to the different marital regimes. It speaks to the different acts that deals with marriages. But this green paper does not deal with what you call your so-called common law marriages, and it doesn't deal with domestic partnership. So that is the fundamental difference also between the two. The one deals with domestic partnerships, the other doesn't. And the green paper is trying to bring broad uniformity in terms of all the marriage laws, and to be able to ensure that it is it 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 is regulated in terms of the Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights in terms of dignity and equality, and to be able to ensure that it's all aligned. So those are the two pieces. But I mean, I said it's going to take, if you just look at the green paper process, it will not be finished before 2024, which is most probably, and that is why it was very important for the Women's Legal Center to speak about the interim relief that between the time that this legislation is being enacted and for the interim period, what should happen to all these women that are going through current divorces or is currently sitting with the dissolution of an estate because of death and they don't know what to do. So it is exceptionally unfair. After 50 years, you see on your Home Affairs certificate the deceased was single for 60 years, whereas we know that the person was married for 40 years. So there's a broader non-recognition. And we need to be able to see how can we ensure in the interim there's something positive that is there for women. So what we have pushed strongly for the provisions of the Divorce Act to apply for the interim period up until the legislation has been enacted. And also, we have also asked for retrospective relief up until 1994, because it means that if the Constitutional Court accepts our argument, the Divorce Act will only apply to when the Supreme Court made an order, made the order on the 18th of December, which means it will only be retrospective to the 18th of December. And we've made, Advocate Bauer has made very, very strong submissions around the importance of the interim relief.
And so that is the decision we are waiting on now, and part of that is to see also whether there will be interim relief until the legislation is passed, and also how far back that interim relief can be dated. And what you've asked for is dated until 1994, which, I mean, honestly, from listening to the case and looking at the sort of the really long history from when this all first started, makes absolute sense. That is what is fair. These women have been suffering really for 2 decades or more to try and access their rights and be recognized. Seehaam, I just wanted to ask, so one of the issues is raised is that women's rights on the death of a spouse. And the way you described it now is, imagine you've lived with this person, you've been their partner in every single way, you've contributed also to the household, contributed to the house, not just unpaid care work and looking after the kids, but financially as well, if you're working in that house. And to be with somebody for 20, 30, 40, 60 years and then see, you know, him listed as single. What does this mean in terms of sort of inheritance? You said earlier, you know, especially if he hasn't left a will, but tell us how that scenario plays out.
Well, yes, when it comes to the will, I mean, sadly, if the person dies, what they call intestate, it means that the person is not recognized at all as a beneficiary in terms of the Intestate Succession Act. So the person has children, they have a wife in terms of Muslim marriage, but it is like that person was just, there was a live-in relationship, which means there's no connection between the deceased as well as the wife. There's no obligations that is flowing because of that relationship, which technically means the person gets nothing. So over the years, what has happened was the Women's Legal Center and different lawyers have approached the courts to be able to give some form of relief. So if you have somebody that is intestate, they can claim maintenance in terms of the Maintenance of Surviving Spouses Act, because and do a claim also against that particular estate. And so for the purposes of the intestate succession, for example, spouse now includes Muslim spouses, which means that they can also get a share in terms of the Intestate Succession Act. So you can see what was the difficulty that we sat with in terms of the dissolution. So then they will also get, for example, a child's portion of the estate of the deceased. If the deceased left the person without a will, in terms of the civil marriages, what you can do is that you can claim against the estate in terms of maintenance. And so that Maintenance of Surviving Spouses Act has also been amended. That spouse includes Muslim spouses, which means that they can claim also against the estate. But as you can see, it wasn't the law that changed. It was the courts that gave rights. And we can't continue in this piecemeal manner. It is too expensive. How many legislation will we have to change and to have an inclusion of spouse to read in also spouses in Muslim marriages? And we need to be able to ensure that there is broader, not just recognition, but broader recognition as for women or spouses in Muslim marriages.
Yeah, exactly. And I often also think of, as I was going through, really this long amount of time and all of this legal action, there's also the cost to the state, which is essentially taxpayers' money. And just to put it out there, because that is another reason we should be interested in it. They are dragging that out. Seehaam, we need to take another break, but we're going to come back with last thoughts after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we have been discussing the non-recognition of Muslim marriages and the long-standing case that has been going on for more than 20 years in order to recognize these rights. Now, in Women's Month, we saw this case going to the Constitutional Court, and as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown, the hearing was done virtually, and something emerged out of that had really nothing to do with marriages. One of the participants, whose Zoom audio was not muted, made a comment before it went, and I'm just looking it up here, referred to the lead counsel, Advocate Nazreen Bawa, as looking like a ninja. And so this was a really prejudiced comment. It was heard by everyone. There was some more given, and because I've got Seehaam Semaai here with us, who is the director of the Women's Legal Center, I wanted to end off by just highlighting this topic, and I'm doing it at the end of the show. I want to just make a point here, because what has happened ultimately is that the comment has become the story of Muslim marriages instead of this really important historic case. And so while we've had a wonderful, robust discussion around Muslim marriages and trying to sort of set that record straight, Seehaam, I do want to ask you, about your response. You are also Muslim. You are also a Muslim woman, and that is highly offensive. And so I just wanted to ask you about your feelings and your response to the comment being made in 2021. And it's the weirdest thing in a case, a long-standing historic case about Muslim women. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Lenina, I've said in so many times that the Muslim community is not homogenous in South Africa. We all come from different backgrounds. We have intersected. For example, I identify, I am a Muslim, I am a woman, I am South African, and all of those identities merge, which means that we need to be able to understand that there's different forms. But so long as you identify as a Muslim, just like Advocate Bawa identifies in her way, in terms of being a Muslim. And I think that the utterances were made, it was hurtful, it was demeaning. And in the case of Muslim women, that she was seeking to trying to wear this religious headscarf because she was putting on an act for the court, given the subject matter, which I think is unacceptable, because Advocate Bawa has been a stalwart of she's been fighting, she's been doing this work for the past 7 years, but she has been advocating literally for the past 27 years. She is a professional. She has contributed relentlessly to this case. And I think for us, the center took exception to the utterances that Advocate Bauer was acting for the court by expressing her Muslim identity openly. And Advocate Bauer, at the beginning of the hearing, the center has worked on this matter for a long period. And I think we need to be able to introspect and see what this prejudice was actually all about. We remain, although we saddened, but we have to admit, I have to admit, that it was not a surprise, Lenina, that she has been targeted as the face of the case today because of in this vile and misogynistic manner. And we need to understand that it undermines a professionalism. I hope that the attorney that has uttered will relook in terms of the submissions that she's have made, which has indicated that she did not make those particular comments, or the comments was not directed at Advocate Bauer. But I think it was very clear for all of us that was sitting in court what the utterances actually meant. We knew, as Muslims, we knew what was actually meant. And so we need to be able to, what we are going to do is to be able to see how this particular issue will be able to take it further. However, we also don't want this particular issue to take away the broader challenge of Muslim marriages in South Africa, or the recognition of MPL in South Africa, because what has happened here actually just reflects the prejudice that has been that has gone against Advocate Bauer, our attorneys at the Women's Legal Center. We do get a lot of hate mail. We do get a lot of conservative Muslim organizations commenting on our so-called secularists and calling us various, I would say, vile Muslim derogatory terms. And I think, and that is why it wasn't a surprise. We have had a full week of a lot of work that had to be done, but we were just shocked that it was another woman that indicated this particular, that Advocate Bauer was wearing only for the sake of this particular case, and not because she's wearing it because she's Muslim.
Thank you so much, Seehaam. I mean, I have to say it is very saddening, and I'm also going to say, sort of from my perspective, it was really interesting because I looked at it from, as just another way also that women and the way that we dress and what we wear in a broader sense are being policed. Just in saying, in the fact that she was wearing it, the insinuation that what she was wearing was to show off. We hear this even in rape cases. So I just want to, put a call out to everyone to just have us check ourselves to understand that it's not okay to police the way women dress in any setting, and to also just sort of go back and think about it, I think, in a broader sense. But that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much, Seehaam, for joining us, for giving us context around this issue, and we will be following it. We want to wish the Women's Legal Center good luck. And hopefully we will be able to report something positive from the forthcoming judgment. And that is all we have for this evening. Thank you very much. I'm Lenina Rassool. Good night.